A couple of weeks ago when Martin Lacey asked me to speak on Jethro, of course I knew who Jethro was and I knew a little bit about him, but it led me to search the scriptures to see if I could find out anything more. In Exodus chapter 2, verses 15 to 22, we're told that Moses meets Reuel, a priest of Midian, and ends up working for him and marrying one of his daughters, Zipporah. And that Moses and Zipporah had a child, his name was Gershom. Then as we move into Exodus chapter 4, verse 18 to 20, and this took place just after the burning bush experience, we're told Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Let me return to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive." Jethro said, "Go, and I wish you well." From these verses, we're told that Moses' father-in-law was called Jethro, not Reuel. Jethro means his excellency. Then as we move into Exodus chapter 18, verses 1 and 2, we read, "Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt." So once again, Moses' father-in-law is called Jethro, and he is the priest of Midian. His daughter is Zipporah, and she marries Moses, and their first child was called Gershom. So Reuel and Jethro are the same person. He was a Midianite, but I also discovered that Jethro was a descendant of Abraham. Genesis chapter 25, verse 1 and 2. Abraham had taken another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. You see, after Sarah, Abraham's first wife, had died, aged 127, we're told that Abraham married a lady called Keturah. And one of their children was named Midian, from whom the tribe of the Midianites was established. The Midianites inhabited the land of Moab, which would be modern-day Saudi Arabia. They worshipped false gods, and they encouraged Israel to worship false gods too. You may remember that in Judges chapter 7, Gideon won a famous victory over the Midianites. So Jethro was a descendant of Abraham, but he wasn't in the direct lineage of Isaac and Jacob. But no doubt through Abraham, he would have gained a limited knowledge of God. It's believed that the Midianites were a precursor to the Zoroastrians, who believed in one God. The Midianites worshipped a god called Yahweh and practiced circumcision. Perhaps this was handed down to them from Abraham. But we know that over time, the Midianites added other gods to their religious beliefs and practices. They were no longer a monotheistic people by the time we meet Jethro. Jethro, along with his people, had forsaken the one true God. I think we have to assume that Jethro was involved in the worship of false gods, because he is described as the priest of Midian. He not only worshipped false gods, but he helped others to do so as well. It's clear from our readings that Jethro had been following what had been happening to Moses. Jethro couldn't ignore God's power in delivering the Israelites from bondage in Egypt. We see that he comes to a realization of the truth about the God of the Israelites in Exodus chapter 18, verses 10 to 12, where we read, "Jethro said, 'Praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly.'" So even when we put all these verses together, we still really have a limited picture of Jethro, and certainly for myself, there's many unanswered questions. After Moses had met with God at the burning bush, Moses asks Jethro's permission to go back to Egypt, taking his wife and sons with him, Exodus 4:18. And then Moses goes to Egypt, he leads the people out of Egypt, and some point after crossing the Red Sea, but before God gave him the law, Moses sends his wife and sons off to go to her father, Exodus 18, verse 2. This may explain how Jethro heard about all that God had done for Moses and the Israelites. But then, after a while, Jethro, Zipporah, Gershom, and Eliezer, they go to meet Moses. Let's pick up the account in Exodus 18, verse 5. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the wilderness, where he camped near the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. Jethro had sent word to him, "I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons." So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way, and how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. He said, "Praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly." Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. The next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people. They stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them serve as judges for the people at all times. But let them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide for themselves. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied." Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel, made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then in verse 27, we're told, Moses sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country. Jethro's advice to Moses was practical. It was full of sound thinking. It was logical. It was common sense. We call it common sense because it's available to everybody, not just Christians. We've already seen that the name Jethro means His Excellency. Perhaps he had the reputation of being a wise and spiritually discerning man. But let's be clear, this wasn't the first time that Jethro had tried to help Moses. Many years previously, Jethro had helped Moses after being on the run from killing an Egyptian, Exodus 2:15-22. Jethro had helped Moses when Moses was at the lowest point of his life. He had fled Egypt and arrived at the watering hole and witnessed some women and their sheep being chased by other shepherds. And once again, we see Moses getting involved in a case of injustice, just like he had in Egypt. Moses must have seemed intimidating to these shepherds, especially as he was wearing his Egyptian clothes. Moses helped the women to water their sheep, and he was invited home to meet their father. We're told that Jethro had 7 daughters. There's no mention of any sons. Jethro welcomed Moses into his family circle. In fact, Moses married one of his daughters, and they had 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer. Then Moses looked after Jethro's sheep for about 40 years until God appeared to him at the burning bush and tells Moses to return to Egypt to deliver his nation Israel from bondage. I'm sure that Moses must have told Jethro about killing the Egyptian, and I believe Jethro must have helped Moses come to terms with his failures and mistakes. In reality, Jethro becomes the father figure that Moses needed at this very point in his life. Perhaps Jethro told Moses that failure in life is inevitable, but that you must learn from your mistakes. Perhaps Jethro reminded Moses of Abraham, how Abraham made mistakes in his life. I think it's true to say that we learn more through our failures than our successes. And let's face it, we all make mistakes. But it's only as you keep on trying that you gain that experience that will lead you to success. Jethro encouraged Moses to renew the vision that God had given him of delivering his people from Egypt. Moses had told Jethro what God had told him to do, and I believe Jethro encouraged him in it. We see how Jethro renewed Moses' heart and spirit when he invited him to come and join his family and live with him. He gave him a job and he allowed him to marry one of his daughters. Jethro helps Moses to overcome his failures and to see that it wasn't all over for him. He showed Moses acceptance and forgiveness and love, even offering him one of his daughters in marriage. We can see from what Moses named his first child that his heart was for his people in Egypt. He called him Gershom, which means I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. Yes, Moses was a foreigner in a foreign land, but his heart was in Egypt with his people Israel. In Exodus chapter 4, we see how God uses Jethro to refresh Moses' heart and vision for God. This was no quick fix. It took 40 years. But in the midst of shepherding and conversations with Jethro, Moses was gradually being refreshed. Perhaps that's why Moses named his second son Eliezer, because it means God is my help. Moses was challenged to connect with God, even in the wilderness. You know, some people in this coronavirus situation, they're separate from church, and it's almost as if they believe they are separated from God. But God will never leave us or forsake us. He is always with us. Perhaps Moses was encouraged by Jethro to use the time tending the flock to be alone with God. Many people connect with God through difficult times and wilderness experiences because we are cast onto him. There's nowhere else to go. The silence of the wilderness prepared Moses' heart to hear God's voice. I love Psalm 23 verse 2. Where David says, he leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. I love walking in the hills or beside a river or a lake because it gives me the opportunity to be still and know that he is God. Psalm 46 verse 10. Times of refreshing are important for all of us. That's one of the reasons why God gave us a Sabbath, a day to honor God, to slow down and listen to his voice, a day to rest, refresh, and renew for the coming week. I think one of the blessings of lockdown has been the opportunity to take time with God. Failure to take time with God can lead to burnout, discouragement, and even depression. God spoke to Moses at the burning bush, and Moses hears the call to go back to Egypt to deliver his people. Moses goes to see Jethro and says, let me go back to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. And what does Jethro say? Go, and I wish you well. Exodus 4:18. Jethro knew all about Moses' call to deliver his people. Moses had told him how his first attempt to save his people had failed. You see, Moses had tried to deliver his people with his own talents, his skills, his position, his strength, but he had failed miserably. But Jethro simply says, go, and I wish you well. He refused to stand in his way. It was time for Moses to fulfill his destiny. even if it meant leaving Jethro and taking the wife and children with him. Jethro knows that Moses is headed into a battle, but he sends him on his way with his blessing. Go, I wish you well. God uses Jethro to replenish Moses' heart, soul, and spirit. God used Jethro to show Moses the importance of honoring God and trusting him for such a great deliverance. After the Exodus and the crossing of the Red Sea, Moses begins to lead the Israelites towards his homeland of the last 40 years to meet up with Jethro and his family. There must have been great excitement in Moses' heart as he's heading home. And then when he meets them, Moses bows down before Jethro and kisses him. Exodus 18 verse 7. This is a sign of respect, a sign of honor. And after hearing Moses' testimony about the miracles and the deliverance of Israel, what does Jethro do? He offers a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God. It's Jethro who is the first to thank God for delivering the Israelites with an offering to God for his goodness. Praise be to the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who treated Israel arrogantly. Exodus 18 verse 11. Jethro brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Jethro in the presence of God. Jethro had been speaking into Moses' life for 40 years. So what happens next should not be a surprise to us. The next day, Jethro's watching Moses governing the people and tells him, "What you are doing is not good." Jethro wants to prevent Moses from burnout, to stay restored and connected with God. He wanted to help Moses in his leadership of the people. He pointed out a better way for him to lead and be a judge for the Israelites. So how does Moses react to such advice? Well, Moses is humble enough to listen and take on board Jethro's advice. Moses listened, but not only that, he made changes to the way he was working. Moses spoke about this in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 9 to 18. He moved from doing everything himself to releasing others to do the work. And verses 19 to 22 show us how Moses changed after taking Jethro's advice. Verse 19, he becomes a man of prayer. Verse 20, he commits himself to communicating with the people. He lays out his vision, verse 20. He developed a plan, verse 20. He selected and trained the leaders, verse 21. He releases them to do the work, verse 22. And he took upon himself only what they could not do, verse 22. I believe that God placed Jethro in the path of Moses, just as God places people in our lives to help us. You see, in Jethro, Moses found acceptance and respect. Jethro was a man of wisdom, compassion, and insight. Jethro was the one who'd given Moses a second chance. He gave him a family to belong to. Remember, he'd lost everything after killing the Egyptian. He'd lost his home, his job, his status, his direction in life. But God led him to Jethro, who helped him. Moses was refreshed and renewed, and he was able to reconnect with God. And Jethro saw his son-in-law Moses restored and become the deliverer of Egypt. As we've thought about Jethro this morning, perhaps God wants you to be a Jethro. We need to help our children, our grandchildren, our spiritual children to be renewed after their failures and to be refreshed in the spirit. We need to help them to refocus, and at other times we need to help them reconnect with God and be restored to him. We have a part to play in helping others fulfill God's plan for their lives. As I come to the end of this message, I just want to tell you a few things that we can learn from these few passages. If we want to be an effective Christian witness, we must live consistent Christian lives. If we want to be effective leaders of our churches, families, and in the workplace, we must be willing to seek advice and guidance from others, even unbelievers. Christians haven't got a monopoly on wisdom and common sense. If we want to be effective leaders, we must be willing to delegate responsibility to suitably qualified people. And if we want to be effective leaders, we must continue to be learners ourselves.